The subject of cross-border paradiplomacy is something that I've been seized with. I think this is the second year of a broad project that I'm working on with a number of postgraduate students and postdoctoral fellows, where we're trying to make sense of how the activities of subnational governments in the SADC region actually interferes with the regional integration aspirations of the region. But I should put out a small disclaimer that as much as we talk of cross-border paradiplomacy in the SADC region, it's predominantly from a South African perspective. You will understand why that is the case, because South Africa is at the center. So we're looking at the insights I'm going to share this afternoon. There may be variations when you look at the dynamics from all other border regions, but I'm going to share with you what we've picked up from a South African perspective, and it's an ongoing research project. We're yet to visit some of the countries some of the countries that share a border with South Africa. So let me start by expressing gratitude to the funders of the project, which is the National Research Foundation in South Africa and the University of Johannesburg's Research Committee. So they have sustained the project financially. This is a brief outline of my talk. I'm conscious of the time we're here, so I will try to just give a brief overview, then we can engage, we can go into some of the details during the Q&A session. So what is the context? It is that in the immediate post-apartheid dispensation, South Africa, and of course the broader SADC, had embraced this notion of developmental regionalism, where a form of regional integration that benefits everyone in the region, as opposed to an exclusively market-led integration, although we know that SADC has not quite lived up to this promise of a developmental regionalism. In actual fact, it is the market-led regionalism that seems to have been predominant in the SADC region. But again, SADC as the key institutional driver remains an intergovernmental organization with little space for other actors, to shape and influence the regional integration agenda of Southern Africa. So that begs the question, what do other actors, especially non-state actors, what role do they play in shaping the regional integration agenda in Southern Africa? There have been research that has been done looking at the role of other actors like your businesses, your parliaments and civil society. But I think one of the understudied area is the role of subnational governments in the processes of regionalism in Southern Africa. So that is the entry point of our research. Conceptually, our study is framed within the discourse of regionalism from below, which is both a normative and a descriptive concept, because it advocates for a more people-friendly form of integration, away from the regional integration that is defined by states. And from a descriptive perspective, the notion of regionalism from below seeks to capture the efforts of different non-state and sub-state actors in trying to put forth an alternative regional integration agenda, which sometimes works alongside the state-led initiative, and sometimes work parallel or as autonomous initiatives without necessarily being tied to the activities of nation states and their organizations. Then we also have the notion of cross-border paradiplomacy, which is at the center of our engagement this afternoon, which speaks to what I'll consider to be the border dimension of the international relations of subnational governments. As you will imagine, that this is the most common form of paradiplomacy, because by virtue of the fact that subnational governments share an international border, they are forced to engage in international relations. And so this does not require any other determinant except for the fact that they share an international border and they have to maintain that border. So that is a major driver of their international relations. But beyond the so-called housekeeping function of cross-border paradiplomacy, there is equally a region-building function where it is not just about dealing with common border challenges, but it's also leveraging on the border region to develop it, to govern it away from the capitals of the different countries. I mean, you would know that by their very nature, border regions, they are far removed from their capitals and they are neglected regions. So the region building function of cross-border paradiplomacy seeks to capture the idea that subnational government will want to take advantage of that shared space to work together to develop a common border region without necessarily sometimes relying on their national governments. But I've argued, based on some of the work we've done, that there is equally a state-building function of cross-border paradiplomacy, but that is a conversation for another day. So why do we think, why is it argued that cross-border paradiplomacy can be amenable to a more progressive form of regionalism? So the argument in the literature is that while subnational governments are closest to the people, and as such they understand the struggles of the people, they are better placed to represent the interests of the people. But there's also this argument that is drawn from the literature on municipal internationalism, which suggests that most of the activities of municipal governments in the international space, they are co-produced with civil society. As such, the municipal internationalism, as opposed to the diplomacy of nation states, creates room for ordinary citizens to contribute to the agenda of international relations. So that makes cross-border paradiplomacy, from that perspective, to be more amenable to a more progressive form of regionalism. I'm going to leave this. You can just take a glance of that in the interest of time, but we've engaged in an extensive field research, talking to subnational officials in particular on both sides of South Africa's long border. As I said, we are still in the process of completing that field research. For those of you who do not know the geography of Southern Africa, in particular, where South Africa fits into the picture, so this is the country that, for all intents and purposes, is at the center of the region, not only economically, but equally geopolitically. As you can see, it has an extensive borderline. It shares borders with 6 countries, one of which is completely surrounded by South Africa. Lesotho is completely within South Africa, and Eswatini, for the most part, is also embedded within South Africa. So there is, from a geographic perspective, there are strong incentives for the subnational governments to engage in cross-border paradiplomacy. So what I'm going to do now is to just quickly take you through the manifestation, the different forms of cross-border paradiplomacy between South African subnational governments and their counterparts in the region. The first form is through what we refer to as ad hoc and informal engagement, which is the most basic form, right? That, as I said, by virtue of the fact that they share a border, officials on one side of the border engage with their counterparts informally. I mean, we're made aware of instances where when undocumented immigrants or migrants die in South Africa and they need to be repatriated, all they need to do is to pick up the phone and try to engage with their counterparts on the other side without necessarily going through formal processes. Or when certain individuals need to be deported back to Lesotho in particular, it is the informal network of municipal officials on both sides of the border that make this deportation not only effective, but a little bit more humane. Because remember, we have a harsh immigration policy here. And at the national level, they don't care about what the implications are. It is the municipal officials that will go the extra mile to provide, to ensure that by the time the deportees arrive on the other side of the border, there are people there to receive them, provide them with food, and look for a way to integrate them into the local communities. Then there is these multi-stakeholder coordinating forums, and this is a step higher from the informal engagement, where there have been attempts now to try to formalize this engagement through these stakeholder cross-border forums. And these forums are essentially the brainchild of subnational governments, but they bring together actors across the different levels of government and across society. So while they are convened and led by subnational officials, they bring different actors to deal with common border challenges. So we have them across the borderline, particularly on the borderline between South Africa and the Free State, South Africa and Lesotho. That is where you have these forums actually being quite effective. And they've played quite a major role in dealing with some of the cross-border challenges that have been experienced in these border areas, particularly in relation to fighting cross-border crime and the tension that arises between border communities because of this crime. The main one of which is stock theft. It's a predominant crime in that region, and these forums have played a key role in trying to resolve or deal with some of these issues. They've also been quite helpful in dealing with the challenge of irregular migration. As I said earlier, South Africa is increasingly adopting quite a harsh immigration policy. And it is through these forums that they've been attempt to engage with the national government in Pretoria to try to create some kind of a dispensation to meet the challenges of especially migrants who come from countries like Lesotho with harsh socioeconomic conditions, but they rely on working in South Africa for their livelihoods. So the forums have been used, especially by subnational officials in Lesotho, to try to seek concessions from the South African government to help their citizens to get some kind of better, should I say, working conditions in the country that is commensurate with the challenges that their citizens face in Lesotho. Well, here am I doing with the time?
You have a minute. I sent you a
Oh, no, I did
warning.
not see that.
You
Okay,
see it,
quickly,
okay.
I will try to wrap up. Then you have the formal bilateral engagement where you have this agreement signed between municipalities on the South African side and their counterparts on the other side of the border. But mostly it is the provinces that have used these formal agreements to engage with their counterparts in the region. I want to highlight an interesting one here, which you find this on the border region between the Free State province of South Africa and Lesotho, where most of the agreements here are between a province in South Africa and the national government in Lesotho, which speaks to, for the most part, speaks to the capacity challenge of the national government in Lesotho, which then latches onto cross-border paradiplomacy to enhance its capacity to meet its obligation as a nation state. And it's from this perspective that I've argued that cross-border paradiplomacy also serves a state-building function, because you have a small state that is challenged in terms of its functional capacity, relying on its cooperation with the province to be able to do what it's supposed to do as a state. Then there are your formal trilateral and multilateral partnerships that bring together different subnational governments. We have municipalities that have come together to form multilateral partnerships to try to develop their common border region. Then you have the tourism entities in different provinces, which have also come together to harness the tourism potential of their sub-region. Then we also have an instance where a macro-level state-led regional integration scheme to control the spread of malaria is implemented through the engagement of districts within the border region. So the Umluma Cross-Border District Committee serves as a coordinating forum to implement an initiative that has been agreed upon at the SADC region, but also at the level of South Africa, Eswatini, and Mozambique, through the initiative that is referred to as the Mosaswa Malaria Response Initiative. So this is one of, well, this is the only case where you have a subnational cross-border initiative that is somehow embedded within the formal, well, this state-led integration initiatives in the region. Let me conclude with some basic, here, please just permit me, give me 2 more minutes to conclude with some basic reflection on what these all mean for regionalism in the context of Southern Africa. The first is that there are no formal linkages between the regionalism efforts of subnational governments and what SADC seeks to achieve. And I consider that to be a missed opportunity, particularly from the perspective of social integration. One of the weakest links of SADC is that it has, just like with the AU, they have neglected the social dimension of integration. And I think by latching onto the cross-border activities of subnational governments, that could provide a basis to deepen or to create, to promote social integration in the region. A good example, if you look at the cooperation between the Northern Cape province of South Africa and the Karas region in Namibia, they've got a twinning agreement that for the most part focuses on social integration, which is driven by the shared ethnic identity of the people in both regions. And I think that's an example that SADC will leverage on to drive social integration as part of its integration agenda. There is equally a weak interface. I mentioned earlier that the Umluma District Coordinating Forum is somehow embedded within Mosaswa, but the institutional linkages remain weak. So as much as the initiatives of subnational governments, they reinforce the objectives of the state-led regional integration efforts, institutionally, there is a great disconnect, which means that they cannot quite achieve what they set out to achieve. And I think we also need to critique the very agency of subnational governments as drivers of bottom-up regionalism. Yes, that they may, because of how they may be close to the people, but because we also need to bear in mind that as institutional actors, they are also embedded in the current order, and that the extent to which they can serve as catalysts to transform that order is limited. A good example here is the Umsebe Partnership, which positions itself as an alternative, people-centered integration partnership. But we see that for the most part, it still mimics this whole state-led diplomacy, and it is still influenced by the logic of market-led integration. So as much as subnational governments may have that potential, but they are still constrained by the fact that they remain embedded within the same order that they may want to transform. But let me conclude by also talking a little bit about how subnational governments have equally been spoilers of developmental regionalism. We have a case on the border between the Free State Province of South Africa and Lesotho, where it is the provincial transport department that has been like the spoiler, making it difficult for them to be cooperation to manage transportation on that border. So efforts to try to bring, there has been a conflict between transport operators on that border, and efforts to try to resolve that on the basis of SADC's protocols have, for the longest time, been undermined by the role of the provincial transport department. And the argument there is that this transport department, because officials there may be linked to transport operators, so there is that political economic dimension that may also influence how subnational governments engage in cross-border paradiplomacy, and which may also undermine their ability to serve as progressive forces for a more people-friendly regionalism from below.
Yeah.
I'll end there. Thank you so much for the additional time, Ohio.